Welcome to a presentation on the pros and cons of the ballot measures for the November 3rd election. I'm Karen Bricker, board member of the League of Women Voters of Los Altos-Mountain View. Today's program will be between 60 and 90 minutes. You'll get a chance to ask questions, so depending on the number of questions, it will be longer or shorter. You'll ask questions through the Q&A function, not chat. That has been disabled. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit organization of women and men that promotes informed, active participation in government. We do not support, oppose, or evaluate political candidates or parties. But after careful study, we do take positions on political issues. The League invites anyone who is interested in supporting democracy and local government to join us. I would like to introduce our presenter and a longtime member of our league, Pete Stahl. He has presented pros and cons for the League of Women Voters for many years. Pete lives in Mountain View and works as a product designer for a major Silicon Valley company. For fun, he plays oboe in Redwood Symphony and looks forward to the day the orchestra can reconvene to make great music together. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everybody. Looks like we've got about 25 participants, so this is a good crowd. Let me go over the agenda for tonight. I'll be talking briefly about voters' choice. Those of you who voted in March understand what it is. It is a new way of submitting your ballot. I'll be giving you some helpful online resources that you can use to help you decide how to vote. I'll quickly go over the candidates for office, and then the heart of the presentation is the statewide and local ballot propositions. The ground rules for tonight: I will give a description of each measure, and I will give arguments for and against. I actually feel very strongly about many of these ballot propositions. I'm going to do my very best to hide my opinion. If by the time the presentation is over, you aren't quite sure how I feel, then I will have done my job properly. The idea here is for you to decide what makes sense for you. Voters' choice is new this year in Santa Clara County. They've had it in neighboring counties for a few years. The most important thing is there are no more neighborhood polling places. Those of you who are accustomed to going to a local school or church or fire station to vote in your precinct, that is no longer the case. You are now allowed to vote in person at any vote center, and I will give a list of a few of the local vote centers in a few seconds. But the preferred way of voting, or the encouraged way of voting, is to vote by mail. Your ballot, which you probably already have, comes with a postage paid envelope. You do not need to apply stamps to it. You can stick it in any US mailbox and have it collected with the mail. You can also put it into one of the white official ballot drop boxes, or you can take it to any vote center. The drop boxes are located in front of libraries in Mountain View, Los Altos, Sunnyvale, Palo Alto. They're also located in city halls or town halls in the three cities that we cover here: Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills. And there are at other miscellaneous locations, fire stations, the History Museum, and Foothill College. This is what the official ballot drop-off boxes look like in Santa Clara County. And you'll notice at the bottom is the seal of the County of Santa Clara, and it says Registrar of Voters. There has been news in the last few days of other ballot drop-off boxes that are put together by political parties or private organizations. I don't have any information on how secure those are. I can tell you that these white official ballot drop-off boxes are secure, and the ballots are collected daily and go directly to the registrar to be counted on election day. Vote centers can be used to drop off your ballot after you've filled it out and sealed it. They are staffed, and people who need assistance with various languages can get that there. You'll have to consult the registrar's website to find out exactly which languages are provided at which vote centers. They've also got accessible voting equipment so that people who have vision impairments or motion impairments can use this special equipment to mark their ballots. You can do same day and register and vote, and you'll be submitting a provisional ballot. And if you qualify, then your ballot will actually be counted. The vote centers are open from 9 to 5 on weekdays before Election Day. And on Election Day, they'll be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., the same hours as your neighborhood polling places used to be open. Now, the vote centers are not going to be open every day between now and the election. They will be open Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, and then for the last 2 weekends before the election. So that would be the 24th and 25th, and then Halloween night and November 1st, or Halloween day and November 1st. Our local vote centers are at the Mountain View Community Center, Los Altos Youth Center, Los Altos Hills Town Hall, Santiago Villa Mobile Home Park, and these 3 churches. And you know what? On the previous slide, I misspoke. These won't be open until Halloween day. So if you want to use one of these vote centers, it will be October 31st, November 1st and 2nd, and of course on Election Day, November 3rd. sccvote.org is the website to find out more about them. Those of you who have assistive technology at home to account for a disability can use that. It's a program known as Remote Accessible Vote by Mail. You use your own assistive technology to create and print a ballot at home, and then you return that by mail. Remote accessible voting by mail does not transmit your choices over the internet. And once again, this is the website of the registrar. Be careful here again. A political party is involved in a little sleight of hand. If you go to sccvote.com, you will end up at the website of one of the political parties. So make sure it's sccvote.org that you go to, and that will have the latest information on the vote centers, and on assistive technology and on languages spoken at the various vote centers. One last thing, at sccvote.org, after the election, you can track your ballot and see if it has been counted. You simply fill out this form. To find this form, look for the mailbox icon that's at the top of this slide. We've got a few online resources to help you evaluate the ballot propositions. The first is called Easy Voter Guide, and it's at easyvoterguide.org. And you can see here it's available in 5 different languages. Easy Voter Guide has simple half-page summaries of the various ballot propositions. This, for example, is Proposition 23. It talks about the current situation, the way it is now, what would happen if this ballot measure passed, how much it would cost, and a couple of reasons why you might vote yes or no. In that way, it's very similar to what I'll be presenting later in this talk. For those of you who want to go more into detail, there's votersedge.org. For Voter's Edge, you give it your address, and it will find your ballot and display everything that is there, beginning, of course, with the candidates for federal office, and then for state office, and then going on to the local boards and the ballot propositions. For the contests that involve candidates, you can see a capsule summary. This, for example, are the 2 candidates for state senate in our district. You can compare them and get more in-depth their top priorities, their experience, their education, who has endorsed them. And then one of my favorite features, it allows you to follow the money. You can see the candidate on the left here has raised over $1 million. The one on the right has raised less than $6,000. And you can see the top contributors to those candidates. Now this is a screenshot taken several weeks ago, so these figures I'm sure have changed by now. And finally, there is the website for our own chapter of the League of Women Voters. That's LWV of Los Altos-Mountain View, LAMV.org. And you can come here to see recordings of this presentation, as well as candidate forums. Here's a photo of a candidate forum from a couple of years ago, and you can tell because people are actually sitting next to each other and not wearing masks. The ones that we have this year were all done on Zoom, and so you can see the various candidates broadcasting from their home offices. So let's see what's on the ballot. Of course, there's the contest for president at the top, and for president, you can vote for any of the 6 political party tickets. In addition to Democrats and Republicans, there are 4 other parties that have slates in California, including Green. There's a party called American Independent and the Libertarians. For the next level of legislative elections, for example, our House of Representatives election, in March, there was a top 2 primary, and these are the top 2 finishers from March. They happen both to be Democratic, and those are the only choices you have. You are not allowed to write anybody in a top 2 election. So this covers House of Representatives, State Assembly, and State Senate. There will also be education boards, depending on your exact address. You will have some combination of these. For instance, in Mountain View, you'll get the first one, the Santa Clara County Board of Education. We're in Area 1, I believe, but don't quote me on that. You'll also get the Community College District. There are multiple candidates, I believe 4 candidates for 3 seats. You will get the Mountain View Los Altos High School District, and then depending on your exact address, you would get either Mountain View Wisman or Los Altos. Now for the Los Altos School District, there were 2 candidates for 2 seats, so there will be no election in that district. The city councils, you can see each one of the 3 cities that we cover have more candidates than there are seats. So I encourage you to look into all of into whichever contest applies to you. There will be 1 or more judges on your ballot, and there are 5 candidates for 3 seats on the board of directors, board of trustees rather, for the El Camino Healthcare District. So those are the people on your ballot. But we're here tonight primarily to talk about ballot measures. There are 12 an even dozen state propositions. Here are the first 6. Here are the second 6. They're numbered 14 through 25. And there are 3 local measures that we will have here in Mountain View. Los Altos and Los Altos Hills will have just S and RR. So let's dive in. The first statewide ballot proposition is 14. Now, let me give you a little bit of background before I go down the list of new provisions. Back in 2004, the state passed a bond to pay for basic research using embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are cells derived from human embryos that have the capability of becoming any type of cell in the body. The federal government at that point, federal government traditionally funds basic research, either at universities or at laboratories. The federal government had cut off funding for embryonic stem cell research. And so the voters in California passed an initiative bond measure. All of that money has now been spent. It was used to create regenerative medicine institutions at UC San Francisco, at Stanford, at I believe UCLA, and several other universities, and also subsidized research at some for-profit biotech firms. So that money's gone, or rather it's been spent, and Prop 14 is to fund the same type of research. It's $5.5 billion. It'll be repaid from the general fund, and the general fund is where your income taxes go, and other major sources of income from the state go there. It tends to be on the order of $100 billion, plus or minus a lot per year. If Prop 14 were to pass, then it would cost the state roughly $250 million, $260 million per year to repay the bond principal and interest, and this would stretch over roughly 30 years. Prop 14 would fund research using stem cells for medical treatments, dedicating $1.5 billion of it to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurological and brain disorders. And as I said before, the previous bond passed 16 years ago. You might vote for Proposition 14 if you believe the state has an obligation to continue funding this fight against serious diseases, including cancer, diabetes, and neurological disorders. You might vote against 14, or I'm sorry, you might vote in favor of 14 if you believe that the federal funding is unreliable. I should point out that in 2004, federal funding was unavailable. Beginning in 2009, that restriction was lifted. The current administration in Washington has threatened to withhold funding for this type of research, but currently it has not restricted that funding. You might vote in favor of 14 if you believe that the jobs that have been created both in the laboratories and also building the laboratories is a worthy thing to spend this money on. You might vote against Prop 14 if you believe that it's an inappropriate use of bonds to fund private labs and short-term expenses. And I should point out that a bond is in essence a long-term loan. Many people believe that long-term loans should be used to fund only things that will be in use over the life of the loan. Prop 14 allows its money to be used for operational expenses, which of course are short-term, and also things such as laboratory equipment and chemicals. You might vote against 14 if you believe that it's the place of the federal government to fund this research, not the state. And you might vote against 14 if you believe that 2020 has ushered in a new time of uncertainty, and it's not clear whether the state will be able to spare that $260 million a year to repay the bond. Let's move on to Proposition 15. Oh, Proposition 14, by the way, was put on the ballot as the result of an initiative. Signatures were gathered. I will be pointing out which of these are initiatives and which are legislative. Prop 15 is an initiative, and it's an initiative constitutional amendment, which means that even if the legislature had wanted to do Prop 15, it would still have to go before the voters. So Prop 15 is one of two ballot measures having to do with property tax. As many of you are aware, property tax in California is governed by Proposition 13 from 1978, which stated that your property tax is based on its assessed value. The assessed value is set as the purchase price when you first acquire a piece of property. And after that, it can increase only 2% a year. So if you bought a house a few decades ago, its market value might have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, but its assessed value, which is the basis for your property tax, will have increased only 2% a year, so just incrementally. Many people are not aware that Proposition 13 applied not just to residences, but also to commercial and industrial property. And under Proposition 15 on this ballot, on Prop 15 on this ballot, we will split the roles, and commercial and industrial property will be taxed not based on its purchase price plus the 2% a year, but rather on its current value. So in other words, there will be a reassessment event on commercial and industrial property under Prop 15, and that will occur every 3 years, not every 1 year. Residential real estate will not be affected at all by Proposition 15. Now, Prop 15 contains an exception for small businesses or businesses that own a small amount of property. If a business owns less than $3 million in property in aggregate, they will not have those properties reassessed. Also, business equipment, which is currently taxed as property, will be excluded for the first $500,000 worth. So if you are a small business that has less than $500,000 worth of business equipment, you would pay zero on property tax on that business equipment. If you were a large corporation that had many millions of dollars worth of business equipment, you would be paying property tax on all of that except for the first $500,000. The impact of Prop 15 will be to provide somewhere between $6.5 and $11.5 billion in new revenue. And it's difficult to know because we haven't got the assessments on all of this commercial property yet. 40% of this will go to schools and community colleges. Now, here's a chart, and it might be a little difficult to interpret, so let me take you through it. Imagine a single district with three different levels of property taxes. The district on the left is in an area where the property values are low enough that the property taxes do not reach all the way up to the line marked LCFF. And that's the funding formula that the state uses for the school district. So under current conditions, that district would collect all the property taxes generated in its area. State aid would bring it up to the LCFF line. Were Proposition 15 to pass, that district would also receive the red box of additional Prop 15 funding. The middle column is a basic aid district, and what that means is that their property taxes go all the way up to that dotted line, that LCFF line, and a little bit above. Prop 15 funding would bring that up to the same level as the district on the left. Now, the district on the right, my understanding is this is all of our districts here, the Mountain View Los Altos High, Mountain View Huisman, and Los Altos school districts. They are in the category of higher basic aid districts, and they would be given from Proposition 15 a flat $100 per student. You might vote in favor of Proposition 15 if you believe that Prop 13 was never intended to benefit wealthy corporations, if you believe that this money is needed now for schools, fire departments, and other local services, and you believe that Prop 15 protects small businesses and farms. You might vote against Prop 15 if you believe that raising property taxes will simply be passed through to customers and will increase the cost of everything. If you believe that small businesses that rent their places of business will be hit hard because the increased property taxes will be passed through to the renters. And you might vote against Proposition 15 if you believe it's unfair that the basic aid school districts receive only $100 per student, regardless of how much new property tax is being collected in that district. So I'll stop here and take questions. I'll be stopping periodically, not after every proposition, but this one's complex enough. And let me look in the Q&A window here. Question is, are the prepaid postage on ballots bulk mail or first class mail? I believe it's first class, but I don't know for sure. You'll have to look on the envelope itself. Next, does Proposition 15 consider churches and other nonprofits as business? You know, you've stumped me. I do not know how nonprofits and religious institutions deal with property tax. So I would have to look that up. I suggest that you try it as well. And let me remind the audience, you can use the Q&A on the bottom of the screen. Okay, we've got one new one. Is the $3 million small business exemption only their equity in the property? It is the current assessment. So all of the property will be reassessed. And as I say, it'll be on a rolling basis every 3 years. And the reason for that is that the county assessors don't have enough personnel, enough trained personnel to be able to ramp all the way up immediately. So every parcel will, I believe, be reassessed or reevaluated. And then those that have a current market value of above 3 million will be reassessed. All right, we will move on to Proposition 16. Back in 1996, and I apologize to those of you who didn't know this was going to be a history lesson. First, we visited 1978, now 1996. Prior to 1996, California had a number of programs for affirmative action. These are programs that are allowed to give preference to historically underrepresented demographics, such as Blacks or Hispanics, and in many cases, women. In 1996, Proposition 209 outlawed affirmative action programs in California. Proposition 16 would reverse Prop 209. So if Prop 16 passes, affirmative action programs will once again be legal in California. As I said before, affirmative action allows public agencies and universities to include race, sex, color, ethnicity, and country of origin as part of decision-making. And I want to be clear here that affirmative action programs are not quotas or set-asides. I've even got a small quote here. There we go. By law, all affirmative action programs nationwide must be remedial, not preventive. That is to say, they can only be remedies to well-documented discrimination by specific agencies against specific groups, not blanket policies to prevent future discrimination. Set-asides and quotas are illegal. Instead, a university may consider race only as a factor to distinguish otherwise equally qualified applicants. And finally, state departments are merely expected but not required to meet goals for awarding contracts to minority or women-owned businesses. So this gives the state much more flexibility than is commonly thought under affirmative action. And all of those restrictions on what affirmative action can do are the result of a series of Supreme Court cases in Washington. So those are set at the federal level. Prop 16 would affect public hiring and contracting, and also admission to public colleges and universities. You might vote in favor of 16 if you believe that affirmative action is a necessary remedy for centuries of discrimination against women and people of color. If you believe that 16 is a concrete step that voters can take to support social justice, or if you believe that Prop 16 will not disadvantage Asian Americans in college admissions. This is a point of contention. There is research that purports to show that affirmative action will have no impact on the admission of Asian Americans to the University of California. There's a sociologist at Columbia University who published that study. Her name is Jennifer Lee, L-E-E. You can look that up. There is other research contending that that affirmative action will indeed have a negative impact on Asian Americans applying to the University of California. Unfortunately, I don't have that at my fingertips. You might vote against Proposition 16 if you believe that the state should be race blind and treat everyone equally. You might vote against 16 if you believe that not every minority member is disadvantaged and that the state should help only those individuals who need it. And if you believe that preferential treatment leads to higher contract costs than the current lowest qualified bidder method. So I'll move on to Proposition 17, and I'll cover a couple more and then take questions. Proposition 17 would allow people who have completed their prison term and are out on parole to vote. Currently, people who are on parole are not allowed to register or vote. So if Prop 17 were to pass, roughly 60,000 parolees would become eligible to register and vote. People who are in prison will remain ineligible to vote. Now, this will all have no impact at all on people who are in county jails or on probation. Those people are allowed to vote right now, including people who are behind bars in jails. People who are in prisons cannot vote, and people who are on parole currently cannot vote. 17 would allow that. You might vote in favor of 17 if you believe that parole exists to retrain felons to be good citizens, and voting is a key part of citizenship, so it should be part of the parole exercise. You might vote in favor of 17 if you have seen studies that show that recidivism, which is to say new criminal offenses, is lower in places that allow parolees to vote. And if you note that other states, such as Utah, Indiana, and North Dakota, allow parolees to vote, but California does not. You might vote against 17 if you believe that felons should complete the whole sentence, including the prison term and the parole term, before voting. If you believe that voting should be reserved until after parolees have proved that they've changed by completing a clean parole. And you might vote against 17 if you believe that allowing parolees to vote denies justice to crime victims. Proposition 18 would allow people who are 17 when the primary occurs, but will be 18 when the general election occurs, to vote in the primary. So let's say you are 17 years and 10 months old in June when a typical primary occurs. Under current law, you're not allowed to vote in that June primary. If Prop 18 were to pass, then you would be allowed to. This would make somewhere between 250 and 400,000 people eligible for the primary election, depending on whether it's in June or March. Of course, an earlier primary means more people would become eligible to vote in it. Realistically, though, this would add maybe a quarter of that number because statistically, only half of the people who are eligible to vote register, and only half of those actually vote. in primary elections. And the lowest participating demographic, or the lowest participating age group, is currently 18 to 29-year-olds. You might vote in favor of Prop 18 if you believe that anyone who can vote in a general election should vote in the nominating contest for that election. And if you believe that allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections will increase voter interest and participation and get young people who are still in school in the habit of voting. You might vote against 18 if you believe 17-year-olds are not legally adults and will not take elections seriously. Or if you believe that their high school teachers and counselors will be able to influence how the students vote to an improper degree. So at this point, I'll turn over to the Q&A and let's see what's in here. Okay, there was a couple more questions about the assessments in Proposition 15. MB asks, even if they're in debt 90% as a loan, they owe the full taxes. Yes, the property taxes are paid regardless of how much the loan is. Is the $3 million basis indexed for inflation? The answer is yes. So we'll begin at 3 million this year and then creep upward with the cost of living index. For Proposition 14, what happens if the federal government decides to fund it as well? Well, the state money would still be available. There is no provision in the Prop 14 bond for stem cell research to withdraw that funding if it becomes available from the federal government. So let's move ahead to Proposition 19. Proposition 19 also deals with property taxes, but this is residential, not commercial and industrial. Under current law, anyone who is in one of the following special groups, if you are 55 and older, or if you are severely disabled, or if you are the victim of a natural disaster or of contamination of your home site, anyone who's in any of those groups can sell their current house and move to another house within the same county that is of equal or lesser value. And if they do that, all of that, then they are allowed to bring their property tax bill with them. Now, this means if you have lived in a house for 20 or 30 years and its value has increased by $1 to $2 million, you can buy a house that is worth slightly less than that $1 to $2 million plus your original investment in the house. And rather than having your new home assessed at your purchase price, you get to bring your lowered property tax bill with you. Proposition 19 would expand the privileges that allow you to do this. It would allow homeowners to transfer their property tax base to a replacement residence, not just of equal or lower value, but of any value, any place in the state, not just within the same county. And under current law, you can do this only once in your lifetime. Under Prop 19, you'd be able to do it up to 3 times. Let me clarify the of any value. The property tax bill that you bring with you would apply to the portion of your new property that matches the sale price of your old property. And anything above that would be taxed, would be fully assessed. So if you sell a house for $1 million, buy a new house for $3 million, then you'd be paying your old tax bill on that first million and then the full assessed value on the second and third million. So this top bullet point will tend to reduce the amount of property tax that the government takes in aggregate over time. Prop 19 proposes to offset that by increasing the property taxation of inherited homes and farms. Currently, inherited homes and farms are not reassessed as they're inherited. Under Prop 19, the first $1 million is excluded, and any value above that will be reassessed at market value at the time of inheritance. In order to claim this $1 million exemption, it has to be the primary residence of the person who inherited it. And this, it is estimated, will offset, and actually slightly more than offset, the loss in revenue from the first bullet. Inherited second homes and businesses which currently are exempt from reassessment upon inheritance would also be reassessed under Prop 19. You might vote in favor of Prop 19 if you believe that fire victims should not be penalized further by paying higher property taxes on their replacement homes. You might vote in favor of 19 if you believe that it will encourage empty nesters to downsize, which will allow younger families to move in. And if you believe that Prop 19 closes an important loophole for inheritors of mansions who have not been living in those mansions, but rather renting them out as a lucrative business. You might vote against 19 if you believe that it takes away two protections that families have from increased taxes when the property is passed down from generation to generation. And as a result, it may force some families to sell property that has been in the family for a long time. You might vote against it because you are against tax increases in general. And in the long run, it is estimated that Prop 19 will increase state revenues by approximately $1 billion. And you might vote against 19 if you believe that this is an attempt by the real estate industry to increase property sales. I promised earlier to identify which of the measures are initiatives and which are legislative. Proposition 19, in fact, is a legislative constitutional amendment. However, it became a legislative constitutional amendment after the original proponents had gathered enough signatures to make it an initiative. And there was some last minute horse trading going on in the state capitol where the state legislature modified the terms somewhat, and it became a legislative, the original proponents withdrew their initiative in favor of the current legislative constitutional amendment. So the rationale behind this last bullet point is that the real estate industry collects commissions when properties are sold, but not when they're inherited. And Proposition 19 encourages sales and discourages inheritance, although I don't know what good discouraging inheritance would do. But we shall move on. Proposition 20 is an initiative. It has to do with parole and certain property crimes. Prop 20 would roll back provisions from a pair of propositions that the voters passed within the last 10 years that liberalized the parole system. It made more people eligible for parole than had been before. Prop 20 will make it harder for felons to qualify for parole after serving the term for their primary offense. And also for the purposes of determining parole, it will reclassify as violent certain felonies such as robbery, extortion, and elder abuse. These are currently not considered violent when it comes to parole time. Prop 20 creates new felonies of serial shoplifting or serial petty theft, which is either of these misdemeanors repeated 3 or more times. And Prop 20 will allow DNA collected from certain people convicted of certain misdemeanors. Currently, DNA cannot be collected from them. You might vote in favor of Prop 20 if you believe that it would prevent violent criminals from getting out of prison early, if you believe that habitual petty criminals should be treated as felons, and if you believe that the DNA from convicted drug possessors and shoplifters can be used by law enforcement to solve more serious crimes. You might vote against Prop 20 if you believe that it will keep more people in prison longer at a time that we should be reducing prison populations. If you believe that it overturns voter decisions from recent elections, or if you believe that it will waste millions of dollars on prisons that could be spent on healthcare, education, and housing. Prop 21 will relax limitations on rent control. You might remember 2 years ago, we had Proposition 10, which failed. If enacted, that also would have relaxed limitations on rent control. There are a couple of new wrinkles since then. The first is that at the beginning of this year, a new Tenant Protection Act went into effect statewide, and it applies everywhere that there is not local rent control. So that would be many of the cities around here, although not Mountain View or San Jose. And it would be most of the state outside of the Bay Area and Los Angeles County. Those areas are now subject to rent control to the tune of rent can be raised only 5% plus the rate of inflation on an annual basis. And that applies to buildings that have been built 15 years ago or earlier. So 2004 and earlier. Currently, local rent control, such as what they have in Mountain View, can apply only to buildings that are built before 1996, because that is when the governing law for local rent control, which is known as Costa-Hawkins, named after a couple of legislators, went into effect. So under Costa-Hawkins, rent control can be applied at the local level only to buildings built before 1996, and it can be applied only to multi-units. It cannot apply to single-family houses or condominiums. And there are additional restrictions. Prop 21 would permit cities and counties to apply rent controls to housing more than 15, so it would match the rest of the state. It would also permit controls on single-family homes and condos, and it would permit limits on increases between tenants. This is known as vacancy control. Currently, cities are not allowed to regulate changes in rent after one renter moves out and before another one moves in. Under 21, they would be allowed to enact vacancy control, provided that the landlords can temporarily bump rent 15% for 3 years, and this is intended to pay for upgrades such as new carpets and new appliances. This will apply only to landlords with more than 2 units. So if you live in a single-family house or a condominium and rent out part of it, Prop 21 would not apply to you. And all ordinances, including the new Tenant Protection Act at the state level, by law have to allow a fair rate of return to the landlords, and the landlords are allowed to challenge rental rates. And I should point out that the first word of the first 3 bullets is permits. Prop 21 does not force any local jurisdiction, any city or county with local rent control to do anything. If Prop 21 passes, City of Mountain View might decide not to touch its current rent control regulation, or it might apply one or two of these first three bullets. It's up to the local jurisdiction to decide what makes the most sense locally. You might vote in favor of Prop 21 if you believe that rent control helps families, seniors, and veterans stay in their homes, and it should apply to more homes. If you believe that Prop 21 guarantees that landlords can make a fair profit, and if you believe that the 15-year limit that Prop 21 would allow, as opposed to the 1995 or earlier, is still long enough to give developers 15 years of market rate rents before rent controls are imposed, which constitutes a sufficient reward for building much needed housing. You might vote against Prop 21 if you believe that rent control discourages developers from building this desperately needed housing. If you believe that rent control laws tend to delay apartment repairs and also causes other undesirable behavior by landlords. And if you believe that allowing rent control to apply to single-family houses could reduce some home values up to 20%, because much of the competition for local single-family houses is actually coming not from individual families, but from investors who then turn around and rent those out at market rates. If those were rent controlled, you'd see less of that, and so there would be less market pressure. Prop 22, and I'll stop for questions after this one. Prop 22 has to do with gig economy workers. There are a lot of new laws that went into effect at the beginning of this year. One of them was known as AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, and this stated that many workers who had previously been classified as independent contractors had to be treated as employees instead. And among those were drivers for companies such as Uber and Lyft and DoorDash. So these are either passenger transportation or cargo transportation. Under Prop 22, those would once again be categorized as independent contractors, not employees. Now the difference is that employees are eligible for minimum wage, overtime, sick time, unemployment insurance, health insurance, and workers' comp. Independent contractors are not eligible or do not automatically qualify for any of those. However, under Prop 22, certain benefits would be guaranteed to these drivers, including 120% of the minimum wage while driving passengers, a health stipend that would pay up to 82% of the bronze plan. That is the lowest plan at Covered California, which is California's Affordable Care Act outlet. In order to qualify for this, you would have to be driving passengers for a minimum of, or for an average of 25 hours per week over the course of a quarter. If you were found to be driving passengers between 15 and 25 hours per week on average for a quarter, you would get half of this, or 41% of the bronze plan premium. And Prop 22 would guarantee a maximum 12-hour workday. And I should point out that the first two bullets here, the 120% and the 82%, those are based on what the bill calls engaged hours, which are hours spent with a passenger or with cargo in your car. And studies have shown that on average, and there's a huge variance here, but on average, drivers for these services are spending roughly 1/3 of their time waiting or between engagements. So you can do your own math here. Finally, Prop 22 would prohibit local regulation of services such as DoorDash and Lyft. You might vote in favor of Prop 22 if you believe that drivers want flexible schedules and that they cannot get those flexible schedules if they're converted from independent contractors to employees. You might vote in favor of 22 if you believe that the business model of rideshare and delivery companies requires the use of independent contractors, and converting them to full-time, or not full-time, part-time or full-time employees would break that business model. And you might vote in favor of 22 if you believe that it would cost hundreds of thousands of good jobs if these companies were required to treat these drivers as employees. You might vote against 22 if you believe that drivers can have flexible schedules as employees as well as independent contractors. If you believe that these companies actually can afford to pay employee benefits to the drivers. And if you believe that the drivers deserve sick leave, unemployment, overtime, and all of the other benefits that employees are eligible for. So let me turn to the Q&A and see if there's anything new and interesting here. So MB asks, does Prop 19 essentially overturn Prop 13 for assessed value of anything above $1 million? There is still a lot of Proposition 13 left in 19. Let me jump back. So Prop 19 applies only to these special groups, over 55, severely disabled, and so forth. It will only apply to the portion of the new residence that is of equal or that matches the sale price of your previous home, previous residence. I'm sorry, it matches the assessed value of the previous residence. All right. Good. I think that's it for the open questions. Good. Well, let me move forward then past 22. Prop 23. This is kidney dialysis clinic regulation, and we've seen something similar to this 2 years ago. And this is somewhat different. The one 2 years ago had to do with the allowable profit of these clinics and also with sanitation. This one requires dialysis clinics to have a doctor present whenever patients are receiving treatment, and the patients do require this treatment regularly, typically twice or 3 times a week. It's for those of you who don't know what kidney dialysis is, it's for people with kidney failure, and it essentially keeps them alive. So currently these clinics are not required to have a doctor present at all times. 23 would require them to do that. The clinics would need permission from the state before closing or reducing their services at a given clinic. And I should mention that there are 2 giant chains of clinics in the state. One of them is named Fresenius, and the other is DaVita. DaVita has a clinic on El Camino Real in Mountain View. So they would need permission from the state under 23 before reducing services or closing a clinic. The third bullet, clinics could not discriminate against clients based on their insurance. These 2 large chains have been engaging in a program. They call it a program, other people call it something different, whereby they encourage people who are on public insurance, such as Medicare, to drop that insurance and instead enroll in a private insurance policy with the premiums subsidized by a kidney fund charity that is largely funded by the 2 chains. The chains then are reimbursed for the dialysis services at a rate that's 4 times as much as what Medicare pays. The legislature last year passed a law that would prevent that practice. The chains have sued. The thing is currently making its way through the courts. Proposition 23 has a similar provision. And it's up to you to decide whether that provision is necessary. In favor of 23, dialysis is a dangerous procedure and a doctor should be there when it happens. Rural communities need protection from closures. The clinics should have to ask the state for permission before requiring people in sparsely served communities to drive much farther for their treatment. And clinics should not be pushing Medicare patients onto private insurance to collect higher reimbursements. Arguments against 23. Doctors are unnecessary at these clinics and are actually needed elsewhere. That Prop 23 will degrade the quality of health care at places other than these kidney dialysis clinics. Prop 23 will increase costs and force some clinics to close, making it harder for patients to get life-saving treatment. And finally, voters already rejected a similar measure in 2018. Consumer privacy. So one more law that went into effect on January 1st, 2020 is the California Consumer Privacy Act. I'm going to look this up because I don't have all of it right at my fingertips. Here we go. California Consumer Privacy Act is intended to be similar to the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, for those of you who are familiar with that. It is not on the same level as the EU's law, and that's due to limitations placed on it by federal law and court rulings. However, we are currently covered by CCPA, and CCPA gives us all the right to know what personal information businesses collect about us and how they use and share it. It gives us the right to delete our personal information on these sites, the right to prevent our personal information from being sold, and the right not to be discriminated against by a business if we exercise any of our other rights under CCPA. So that's the current situation. Proposition 24 is an initiative statute, and it would increase consumers' control of personal data beyond the new law. It would prevent companies from sharing sensitive personal information such as location, your health data, and your communications. And it must also, you now gain the right to correct personal data that's inaccurate. Under Prop 24, instead of the state attorney general enforcing consumer privacy, there would be a new state agency to oversee privacy laws. And I should point out that Javier Becerra, the state attorney general, has said that he's not got a lot of time or resources to pursue more than a handful of violations of the existing CCPA. Under the existing CCPA, if you are found to be in violation, let's say for a data breach, the company is given 30 days to correct the condition that caused the breach. And if they do so, then the fine is waived. And they can do this once for every type of offense under CCPA. Under Prop 24, the fines are not deductible regardless of whether the company corrects it. Also, the fines are tripled if they involve the data of minors. And finally, under Prop 24, the legislature may amend it if it increases the protections to consumers. You might vote in favor of Prop 24 if you believe that we need to prevent companies from tracking everything we do online. If you believe that there is a need to protect children by giving the state more power to go after violators. And if you believe that an independent enforcement arm without other responsibilities is needed to make sure that rights are not violated. You might vote against Proposition 24 if you believe that this new data privacy law that just went into effect 10 months ago is an unknown, and we should see whether it works first before amending it. If you believe that it still gives too much power to tech companies, and if you believe that consumers shouldn't have to demand data protection, it should be automatic. And this is a reference to opt-in versus opt-out. When you visit a site for the first time, I'm sure most of you have seen this, at the bottom of the screen is a banner that explains that the company is collecting your data, and it invites you to learn more, quote unquote. And somewhere in that learn more is a button that you can click to opt out of having your data collected. People who argue against Prop 24 believe it should be reversed, that companies should never collect any data about you unless you specifically give them permission. And Prop 24 doesn't have that kind of a provision. There's one additional provision of Prop 24 that a correspondent reminded me of, and that has to do with Prop 24 allowing companies to give you discount in exchange for your information. So for instance, if you have a loyalty card at one of the local supermarkets, say Safeway or Nob Hill, that program means that the company is collecting data. It records all of your purchases and uses those for company purposes. And in exchange for giving them that data, the company gives you a discount. You get somewhat lower prices on selected items. And certain organizations, such as the ACLU, believe that amounts to a pay for privacy provision. In other words, people who have additional money and don't want their data to be used by the company can simply pay more to retain their privacy, but people who have less money and can't afford to pay the full price end up having their data used by the companies. So that's something else to put into your consideration of Prop 24. Prop 25 has to do with bail. Now, bail is mentioned in the United States Constitution, I believe in the 8th Amendment. So it's definitely constitutional. The question is it a good practice in California? For those of you who might not be familiar with what bail is, if you are arrested for some crime, you're taken to the county jail generally, and you are booked. And then depending on the crime that you've committed, there's a certain amount of collateral demanded by the court in order to let you go free. And you give this money as collateral to the court, to the bailiff, and it's known as bail, and it's a promise to appear at your arraignment and any other related court activities. If you don't have the amount of money required, you can get a loan, which is known as a bail bond. And for that, you pay only a fraction of the bail amount. And then there's a non-refundable fee that goes to the bail company. If you can't afford even that, then you must stay in jail until your arraignment. Under Proposition 25, that entire system would go away. Instead, arrestees would be released free unless a court determines that they're at risk of committing a new crime or missing a court date. And the evaluation is made on a case-by-case basis. Part of the evaluation is a pretrial risk assessment tool, which is essentially an artificial intelligence program, a machine learning program that has been trained on data, including certain demographic information, such as your age, and information about people who have been accused of that same crime in that county. And that delivers a recommendation to the judge, but it is up to the judge to take that into account and other evidence to decide whether to let you go free. If you are accused of a crime that is not terribly serious or violent, and it's been determined that you can be released, but they don't want to let you go completely on your own recognizance, under Prop 25, a tracking device or a check-in with a probation officer can be required. Reasons to vote for Prop 25. First, bail is inherently unfair. The rich can walk while the poor must stay in jail. Decisions should be based on public safety, not money. And bail forces some guilty pleas to crimes people didn't commit. In other words, people might be tempted to plead guilty to a lesser crime in order to be released, rather than spending all of the time in jail. Arguments against 25. Zero bail lets dangerous criminals onto the street. That this will overwork already overburdened courts, determining whether each and every person arrested is a risk. And that the AI algorithm, the artificial intelligence algorithm, is biased against minorities since it will be trained on data from a system that's already discriminatory. So those are the state ballot propositions. I've got 3 left. Let me turn to the Q&A. Prop 19. Okay, I'm not seeing anything on the recent ones, and I will come back at the very end if I've got time to address the ones on the earlier. So let's move to the local measures. There are 3, the first of which applies only to Mountain View. And this is about parking of oversized vehicles, and in particular recreational vehicles or RVs. Prop C would prohibit parking of oversized vehicles on streets that are 40 feet or narrower. And this would be almost every residential street in Mountain View. RVs, boats, and trucks, anything 22 feet long or longer, or more than 7 feet wide or tall. There would be exceptions, vans for the disabled, and short duration activities such as construction. Prop C, or Measure C, would be enacted and would be enforced wherever there are signs indicating streets that are affected. In addition to the current parking tickets that they might get, these vehicles would be subject to towing. And I should mention that currently in Mountain View, these vehicles are not allowed to park on streets that have bicycle lanes. So for example, Shoreline Boulevard between the train tracks and El Camino Real is close to 100 feet wide. However, it's got bicycle lanes, so these oversized vehicles are not allowed to park there. Arguments in favor of Measure C. Large vehicles on narrow streets pose a safety risk for bicyclists and others using the street. Additional street sweeping, garbage pickup, and sanitation services on these streets cost taxpayers money. Safe parking lots, which is a program run by the county, have excess capacity for these RV dwellers. And more than half of the RV dwellers have no previous Mountain View addresses. So in other words, these are people who have not lived in Mountain View, but have come here in order to live in these RVs in our city. Arguments against Measure C. It prohibits RV parking nearly citywide since streets with bike lanes are off limits. RV leakage and waste are actual problems, but they are already addressed by existing ordinances. Safe parking lots has perhaps 60 spaces available, but over 200 are needed. And families in RVs are essential workers in our community. This argument plays up the fact that many people on minimum wage or other essential workers have been priced out of rental properties in Mountain View. So that's Measure C. Measure S is the water district. Currently, there is a parcel tax on parcels in the water district, and that covers all 3 cities in our area. And it is 0.6 of a cent per square foot. And it is set to expire 8 years from now in 2028. Under Measure S, this parcel tax would continue indefinitely until overturned by the voters once again. This would raise roughly $45 million a year for the water district. Seniors would be exempt from paying this parcel tax. And as I said before, it can be repealed by voters. Voters would be required to qualify an initiative for the ballot in order to do this repeal, unless the water district itself decides to do that. And the funds will be used for safe drinking water, flood protection, habitat restoration, and dam improvements. You might vote in favor of Proposition S or Measure S if you believe that it does not increase taxes, it simply renews what the voters approved in 2012. If you believe that the safety of our water supply depends on this funding. And if you believe that the Independent Citizen Oversight Commission will make sure that the money from the parcel tax is spent wisely. You might vote against S if you believe that special purpose taxes must be reviewed regularly by voters and should not be granted perpetual renewal. If you believe that many parcels are owned by non-residents who cannot vote on this tax, and to this extent, Measure S is taxation without representation. And if you believe that the Independent Citizen Oversight Commission has no power and that the district board can ignore the findings of the commission. And the last ballot measure shows that the Registrar of Voters has a sense of humor. Measure RR, like the 2 R's that you see on the sign at railroad crossings. RR is about Caltrain. If passed by 2/3 of the voters in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County, Measure RR would enact a sales tax increase of 1/8 of a cent for 30 years. So it's limited duration. It's expected that this will provide $100 million per year for Caltrain, which currently gets its funding from those 3 counties. It'll be used for operations and also for capital investments, including electrification, signal upgrades, station upgrades, and new trains that can run on the electric lines. Counties could save the $30 million a year that they are currently putting towards Caltrain, and it's up to the counties what to do with that $30 million. It might supplement the sales tax. It might be used for any other purpose in the county. It's those 3 counties, must pass by 2/3 overall. You might vote in favor of RR if you think that we need this tax in order to keep Caltrain running for thousands of essential workers. If you want to fund system improvements like electrification, which will change the character of Caltrain fundamentally, allowing faster, smaller, more frequent trains, a little bit more like BART, that reduce noise and air pollution. And if you believe that Caltrain prevents traffic congestion and removes cars from the highways. You might vote against R if you believe Caltrain ridership may not recover following COVID-19, that people will continue to work largely from home and will be commuting far less. This would convert the Caltrain electrification into an unused boondoggle akin to the high-speed rail system. You might vote against R if you believe that sales taxes are regressive, hitting poorest people hardest. And you might vote against RR if you believe that existing taxes can fund Caltrain at its current service level and a tax increase is not necessary. So for one last time, I will turn to the Q&A, and I see nothing new. And given that I have droned on for almost an hour and a half, I will turn back
Yes.
over.
Thank you for sharing a wealth of great information. We record all of our forums and our pros and cons. This night's event will appear tomorrow on our website. You see our website right there. And for exhaustive and helpful information about candidates and measures, go to the league-sponsored votersedge.org. If you find that you have more questions about the propositions after tonight, we have one Q&A session scheduled. It is this Sunday, October 18th from 3 to 4. It is listed on our election events page. You can sign up for it. And that concludes today's program. Thank you so much for attending. However you choose to vote, do it safely and early. And thank you so much, Pete Stahl, for a great program.
You're welcome. My pleasure.